Hello and welcome back to Matt Hayes' Tottenham blog and to a very, very special show this Friday. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Daily Telegraph reporter Matt Law to look at the latest of what is going on with Spurs in a week where we've seen, and look, like we mentioned at the top of the show, the Paratici latest isn't the only thing going on at Spurs. And you had a very, very striking paragraph in your piece on Wednesday about the crisis on Tottenham. And just to bring that, you said sources rate this as the worst crisis Levy has faced in his time as chairman of Tottenham. Both the men's and women's team do not have a permanent manager. Paratici is banned worldwide. Harry Kane's future remains in doubt. The stadium still has no name, and a season ticket price hike has been considered. You added that you heard from a couple of sources, one saying this is by far the worst it has ever been for Levy, and another that said, on top of all the problems that are obvious for everyone to see, staff morale levels are at an all-time low, and Levy has isolated himself. It's a mess. Now, the reports in the last 24 hours or so suggesting that Daniel Levy is actually in Asia on business at the moment. But what can you tell us about the current state of play inside the club?
There have been lots of difficult times through Daniel's reign where things have looked as though they're going to get really bad. And in fairness to them, he's pulled them round. You know, I've written several times that I thought that they've been in terrible positions, and he's actually made decisions or things have happened that have pulled them back from the brink. But this is deeper. It's at so many different levels at the club. It's not just football. You know, they've got commercial problems. Like I say, they haven't got a sponsor name for the stadium still. They've had issues with sponsorship. Look at the South Africa sponsorship that suddenly became an absolute farce and disaster. They've got events problems where they didn't even apply for a license on the Beyonce gig. That may seem like a small, trivial, silly thing, but when you put all these things together, there's so many things that don't seem to be operating correctly at the moment, and there's so many gaps that the crisis is so far-reaching at the moment that I think that's why sources have told me that they feel it's the worst, and there's just so many fires and difficulties he's got to deal with and put out that it feels worse than at other times when there have been bad times, but it's felt more isolated to just certain areas at the club, whether it be a manager problem or whether it be a staff problem in terms of the players or what. But and you've got the Kane future hanging over him as well. But since that Champions League final, every major decision I think has gone wrong. And the biggest major decision that he got wrong was not backing Pochettino. I mean, it was an unbelievable decision. I know we're going over an old ground here, but I wrote at the time, it was just an astonishingly bad decision. You know, they weren't going to go down under Pochettino. They needed a period of transition under Pochettino, and he wasn't prepared to give him that time, and he wasn't prepared to go through it and spend the money to do it. And ever since then, it snowballed, and every decision has gone wrong because he's looked for quick fixes since then. And I do think there is a cultural problem within the playing squad. This is where I have total sympathy for what Antonio Conte said after the Southampton match. Whether you agree with how he said it or don't agree with how he said it, I have total sympathy and understanding for the point is there is a cultural problem within that squad. And I wrote about the fact that if you look back at the Amazon documentary when Danny Rose has that infamous meeting with Jose Mourinho, and he finishes it by saying, I will go and see the chairman then, I will go and see Daniel, as a warning to Jose Mourinho. That tells you everything. Players should not feel that they can go and take it to Daniel when it's a playing grievance. And there has been an undercurrent of that within that squad. Not everybody, certainly not with everybody, but there's been an undercurrent of, we will go to Daniel, we will take it to Daniel, and we will survive and you will not survive. And that is a massive, massive problem. And that's what Antonio Conte was saying, it needs to change. We've seen an interview with Richarlison after the AC Milan game that again spoke to that sort of attitude being within the Tottenham squad. And it feels again that Daniel would rather change the coach than change the culture.
On the point of Pochettino there, because I do think it as the beginning of it's the beginning of this downfall for Spurs, and it's an interesting point. Do you know if there is any sort of acceptance within the club that the dismissal of Pochettino at the time was a mistake, and could that be the reason that maybe he's on the list at the moment?
But then in terms of Pochettino being on the list now, actually, I feel that there's a real reticence to go back to Pochettino within the board for the very reason of the fact it would be a huge public admission of a complete mistake they made and a complete waste of money in the meantime, because the hiring and firing of Pochettino and the coaches in between them, I worked out not long ago, is cost in the region of £50 million it didn't cost that to fire Pochettino, but when you account for firing Pochettino, hiring another guy, firing another guy, hiring another guy, it will have cost in the region of £50 million. And to be honest, that's a generous guess. That's a generous guess to Tottenham. Then to go round in one massive £50 million circle and have got really nowhere would be an astonishing admission of a mistake. It might be one that they should do. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do that, but I think that that's why there's a huge reticence to go back to Pochettino if they can help it. And from Pochettino's point of view, what actually has changed? To go back into Tottenham now, what actually has changed? I think he would have to have some huge guarantees about what he would be allowed to do, because he would still want to go back in and go through the painful rebuild that he was talking about back around the Champions League final. And would they be willing to let him do that and give him the power to do that? That's a massive question. Yeah, I never want to say never, because you get caught out in football saying that. But at the moment, as we currently stand, I think it's very unlikely.